The submarine does not glide through the ocean so much as grind its way forward, a steel animal forcing itself through a black, crushing world that does not want it there. Every few moments, the hull answers with a groan, a long, low sound that feels less like metal and more like a living thing in pain. Men pretend not to hear it. They pretend not to notice the dust that drifts from weld seams when the sound lasts a little too long. Inside, the air died some time ago. What remains is a heavy, sour stew of heat, sweat, oil fumes, battery gas, and fear. Breathing is work now. Each lungful has to be pulled in and pushed out like hauling on a rope. The thermometer in the control room broke hours before, the thin red column rising past its marked limit and then simply giving up. The engineers say the engine compartment is well above 60 degrees Celsius. In the central compartments, it is a little less, but not enough for anyone to pretend there is such a thing as comfort. A 19-year-old conscript named Petya Zaitsev sits hunched over the sonar console, his headphones cutting twin circles of raw skin into the sides of his head. Sweat trickles down his neck and soaks his collar, then keeps going, sliding along his spine. His shirt has become a second skin, sticky and suffocating. He wants to scratch, to peel it away, to move, but movement takes energy, and energy takes oxygen, and oxygen is the one thing no one wants to waste. So he sits, his fingers hovering over the controls, his ears full of static and the slow, ceaseless heartbeat of the ocean. Then something new cuts through the noise. A thin, precise metallic ping slices into his skull, so sharp it almost feels like a physical object. Petya flinches even though he has heard this sound dozens of times in training. In class, with fresh air and coffee and a bored instructor, it had been an interesting noise. Here, now, far below the surface, with the boat shaking from near misses, it sounds like accusation. Active sonar. The Americans are no longer just listening. They are calling out. Another ping. Another. A pattern sweeping left to right to left. Searching. Petya raises a hand, wipes sweat from his eyes, and calls out, his voice cracking more from dryness than fear. Contact. Active sonar. Bearing. Approaching from port side. The words are barely out before the first of the new charges detonates. The sound is like the sky collapsing. The hull jumps, a full body flinch that runs from steel to bone. Lights flicker to a dim orange, then fight their way back to full brightness. Somewhere forward, a mug flies from a rack and shatters. Somewhere aft, someone curses in a tone that sounds dangerously close to a sob. In the central control room, Captain Valentin Savitsky does not fall and does not reach for support. His boots shift a little wider. His hand tightens on the edge of the chart table until his knuckles show through the thin skin of his fingers. His face shines with sweat under the harsh lamps, but his eyes remain cool, two chips of dark glass that keep returning to the same points: the depth gauge, the clock, the oxygen meter. The oxygen reading is not yet in the red, but the needle has crept into a gray zone the manuals like to call caution. Manuals are written on land, in offices with windows. Out here, in a submerged compartment on the edge of the Caribbean, caution translates into sailors fainting on their feet. Someone had collapsed in the torpedo room earlier, the big petty officer who boasted he could lift a crate of shells alone. He had been walking, then he had simply tipped forward like a tree, his hands never rising to catch himself. His face hit metal with a sound that made the nearest men wince. They dragged him away, slapped his cheeks, poured water over his head that everyone knew they should be saving. After a while, his eyelids twitched, and he started breathing again, fast and shallow. When he opened his eyes, they were full of something that looked very much like betrayal. His own body had given way. Now everyone was listening for the moment theirs would too. The political officer stands in the corner of the control room, his back straight in a posture that would be admirable if it did not look quite so forced. His name is Ivan Maslenikov. His tunic is unbuttoned at the throat, his glasses keep sliding down his nose, and his hair is plastered flat against his skull. Heat has stripped him of the careful dignity he wears ashore. What remains is a thin man with tired eyes and a job that might be impossible. He watches the captain, marks every word, every gesture, every hesitation. He listens to the muttered comments of the crew. His official duty is to ensure political reliability, to keep the party's will alive in cramped compartments where superstition, fear, and fatalism thrive in the dark. Unofficially, he is just one more human in a hot steel tube, wondering whether the next sound will be a near miss or the end. On a narrow bench bolted to the bulkhead sits Deputy Flotilla Commander Vasili Arkhipov. His rank tabs outrank every man aboard except in one specific domain. This is not his boat. It belongs to Savitsky. That division should make things simple. It does not. Not today. Arkhipov leans forward a little, elbows on his knees, hands dangling loosely. The posture looks relaxed from a distance. Up close, the tension shows in little details. The way his fingers refuse to quite touch. The way the small muscles in his jaw twitch every time an explosion sounds above. The way his gaze constantly moves from instrument to face to hatch and back again. A quiet inventory in motion. He had stood like this on other submarines, in other seas. He had learned how to read the language of stressed metal and strained men the hard way, when everything smelled faintly of burned insulation and something worse, something that clung to uniforms and nightmares alike. On submarine K-19, when the reactor cooling system failed and the temperature began to climb toward numbers that meant catastrophe, the air had not been this hot. It had felt colder, in a way, a chill that lived under the skin. That boat had not been hunted from above. It had been hunted from within by physics and human error. Men had gone into a flooded, irradiated compartment carrying tools that suddenly weighed much more than metal. They had come out with hands that looked like they belonged to someone else, skin turning a strange gray, blisters rising in seconds. Some had tried to make jokes about it. Some had simply stared at their own fingers as if distance might help. All had understood on some level that their futures had been measured out and reduced to months, then weeks, then days. Since then, Arkhipov has carried an extra passenger everywhere he goes. Awareness of how fast things can go from bad to irretrievable, of how calmly disaster can arrive, wrapped in procedure and optimism, until suddenly there is nothing to be done but measure the damage. Now, on B-59, he feels that same cold under the heat. The radio man speaks up, his voice hoarse, his lips cracked. Comrade Captain, still no response from Fleet Command. No traffic from headquarters. Only foreign transmissions, mostly American. Some unidentified. Savitsky does not look away from the chart. No orders from Moscow. None, Comrade Captain. The words land heavier than another depth charge. Somewhere in the submarine, an already frayed nerve finally snaps. A man starts laughing quietly, a thin, high sound that has no humor in it at all. Someone silences him with a low, growled command. The laugh stops, but the echo remains. No orders, no contact. They are not just deep underwater in a hostile ocean. They are cut loose from the only voices that are supposed to tell them when to shoot and when to stay still. Above them, the world might be calm. Above them, the world might already be on fire. A new sequence of soft thuds marches overhead. These are not full-depth charges. The captain and the engineers know the difference. The Americans are using smaller charges, set to explode shallower than the submarine's current depth. They rattle the hull, rattle teeth, rattle confidence, but they are not meant to tear the boat open. Officially, they are signaling depth charges, a polite term invented by someone who has never been in a steel cylinder when such signals go off nearby. Savitsky's voice cuts through the murmurs. They think we are deaf, he says. They think they can hurt us like fish. Maslenikov seizes the line. They are trying to intimidate us, Comrade Captain. Force us to betray our orders, surface in front of their cameras, show weakness. It is a calculated provocation. Weakness. Provocation. The words taste familiar and bitter. Everyone in the room has chewed on them in training, in lectures, in carefully scripted political sessions. It is one thing to discuss them in a classroom. It is another to feel them press in against steel. Savitsky's gaze slides from the chart to a particular patch of bulkhead. For a casual observer, it is just another section of scarred, painted steel. For everyone who has spent time in this control room, it is different. It is the door to a small, armored compartment. Inside lies the document with 3 signature lines and the weapon those signatures would unleash. The guard posted beside the safe has been standing in the same spot for hours. He is pale under his tan, his eyelids heavy, but the rifle in his hands does not waver. His presence is a reminder that the object inside that safe is considered so important that it must be guarded even when every other man aboard is struggling to stay conscious. The torpedo in Tube 1 is not like the others. It carries a warhead built in secret laboratories, tested on remote islands no one will ever be allowed to talk about. The planners in their offices have written down what it can do in neat columns and rows, yield in kilotons, expected lethal radius, blast pressure at various distances, probability of mission kill against various classes of ships, all tidy, all precise. None of that neatness survives contact with imagination. In the minds of the sailors sweating in this tube, the weapon in Tube 1 is less a machine and more a small chained sun. Savitsky looks from the safe to Arkhipov. "Comrade Deputy Flotilla Commander, we are under attack. We have been unable to raise command for more than a day. We are being harassed in international waters by enemy forces. Under our instructions, that authorizes the use of the special torpedo." His tone is measured, almost calm. Underneath it, something tightens and thrums. Arkhipov answers slowly. "We are under pressure, Captain. We are not yet under lethal attack. Their charges are not set to crush depth. Their aircraft have not dropped ordnance on our estimated position. They are, so far, signaling." Maslenikov steps in, eager to give weight to the captain's argument. "They are signaling contempt, Comrade Arkhipov. They believe they can drop explosives on a Soviet warship without consequences. They must see that is not true. The special weapon exists for exactly this scenario, to make clear that aggression will be answered." Petya hears the phrase special weapon and swallows. His mouth is too dry for it to help. He stares harder at his instruments, as if the flutter of a dial could somehow give him permission to stop listening to the conversation behind him. Savitsky's gaze hardens. "Our orders were explicit," he says. "In the event we are attacked, cut off from command, and forced into a situation where the integrity of the boat is threatened, we are authorized to use the torpedo and then attempt to return home. Those conditions are present." Arkhipov feels the eyes in the room shift toward him, openly or from the edges of vision. The guard's grip on his rifle tightens. The radio man's fingers hover over his keys. Even the men at the valves, their faces slick and sallow, are listening with an intensity that has nothing to do with their machinery. He could say yes. It would be easy. A few words, a nod, a signature on paper. He remembers the look in the eyes of the men from K-19's repair parties when they volunteered for a second trip into the irradiated compartment. A quiet, stubborn resolve that had nothing to do with heroism in the abstract. They had not been thinking of speeches or medals. They had been thinking of the men sleeping a few bulkheads away. Now, thousands of kilometers away in a different ocean, a different choice waits. Maslenikov leans forward, his voice gaining steel. "Comrade Arkhipov, hesitation at such a moment can be catastrophic. If hostilities have already begun, every second that passes without our response emboldens the enemy. The motherland expects us to act decisively." Arkhipov turns his head just enough to look at him. On K-19, Ivan, decisive action meant sending men into a compartment that would kill them so the reactor would not. Those men did not hesitate. They did not ask for assurances from Moscow. They knew the stakes. They paid with their lives. Do not lecture me about expectations. The name of the earlier submarine moves through the room like a cold wind. Some of the younger sailors have only heard rumors about that accident. Others know more. None of them want to picture their own boat glowing from within. Another sequence of pings marches across the hull. Another roll of muted explosions pounds down from above. A panel light flickers, then steadies. The submarine rocks in the invisible wake of a destroyer passing closer this time. The hull complains audibly. It is not a sophisticated sound. It is the groan of a metal structure being pushed toward its limits. Savitsky steps closer to Arkhipov. His voice drops low, meant more for the man in front of him than the room. "Vasili," he says, and the formality drains from the syllables. "You know as well as I do what will happen if they force us to surface. They will ring us with their ships. They will shine their lights on our flag. They will photograph us, question us, prod us. In Washington, they will raise toasts. In Moscow, they will convene committees." Archipov's lips twitch in a humorless, almost smile. "They will convene committees no matter what we do. I will not have my boat paraded like a captured animal," Savitsky snaps. Not after what we endured to get here. Not after their plane nearly destroyed hull integrity with those practice bombs. We are not a trophy. His pride is genuine. So is his anger. So is his fear. It all mixes into something volatile. The guard at the safe shifts his weight. It is a small movement, but in the quiet after Savitsky's outburst, it sounds loud. "Comrade Captain," he says cautiously, "protocol requires the agreement of the captain, the political officer, and the senior flotilla representative for use of the special weapon." "You have my agreement," Savitsky answers. "You have the political officer's agreement. You have the situation our orders described. Open the safe." The guard's gaze flicks to Arkhipov and then away, as if physical contact with those eyes might burn. No one speaks. Even the endless background whisper of machinery seems to dim for a heartbeat. Arkhipov stands up. The movement is unremarkable in itself, but in this room, at this moment, it might as well be the sound of a gun being cocked. Fabric tears away from the bench where sweat had glued it. His legs complain. His head swims for a second. He waits for the dizziness to pass, then steps closer to the captain until he can see, beneath the sweat and strain, the older lines at the corners of Savitsky's eyes. "Valentine," he says, using the first name deliberately, "if we fire that torpedo, we are not merely shooting at ships. We are throwing a match into a room full of fuel that reaches from here to Moscow, to Washington, to cities neither of us has ever heard of." Savitsky's reply comes hard. "If that fuel has already been lit by them, what then? Our radios are silent. Our homeland may already be under attack. Our wives and children may already be dying. Do you suggest we cower here in the dark, waiting to suffocate so that later someone can say we behaved with restraint?" The word cower scrapes along Archipov's nerves. On K-19, he says quietly, "Cowering would have been refusing to go into a compartment glowing with radiation." Those men went in, some twice. They did it so the rest of the crew might live. When they could no longer stand by themselves, they still tried to joke about their bandages. Do not mistake refusal to start a war for fear. Maslennikov's face tightens. This is not the same. Those men died serving the state. You are talking about letting the state be struck without reply. I am talking, Arkhipov says, about the difference between reply and annihilation. We were told the special torpedo exists to deter aggression, not to guarantee that the first misunderstanding becomes the last day of human history. The phrase hangs there, last day of human history. It is melodramatic. It is also, in this room, in this moment, horribly literal. Another volley of small charges explodes above them, closer now. One of the lamps in the ceiling bursts with a pop, showering hot fragments of glass onto the deck. Men curse and kick them aside. The surviving bulbs cast a harsher, more desperate light. Savitsky's voice roughens. "If we do nothing, this boat may not reach home. Do you understand that? The batteries are failing. The carbon dioxide is rising. Men are collapsing. We cannot stay down forever." "Then we do not," Arkhipov answers. "We surface." The word draws a collective intake of stale air. Surface. In the middle of enemy ships, under the guns and cameras of the American Navy. It feels to some like volunteering to walk naked into a circle of wolves. To others, it feels like a chance to breathe. Maslennikov is quick to respond. Surface without orders in the middle of an enemy task force. Do you understand what that will look like in Moscow? Cowardice at best, collaboration at worst. The party does not look kindly on improvisation in matters of nuclear weapons. Archipov's patience thins. The party does not breathe this air, he says. The party does not hear the hull when it complains. The party does not have its heartbeat measured between one explosion and the next. He turns back to the captain, softens his tone. "Valentin, you are angry. You are exhausted. So is every man here. The Americans know nothing of our torpedo. To them, these are games of intimidation and response. If we answer their games with that weapon, they will not see it as lesson. They will see it as the opening of war, and they will answer in kind with everything they have. You do not know that," Savitsky says, "but there is less force behind it now." "No," Arkhipov agrees. "I do not. That is exactly the point. We do not know. And in the absence of knowledge, we must not choose the most irreversible option available." He gestures toward the safe without looking at it. "Open that box, and we lose the option of regret." A strangled wheeze echoes from the hatch to the engine compartment. A mechanic stumbles into the control room, his face gray under the flush of heat. He tries to salute and nearly falls. Two men catch him, guide him to a stool. His chest rises and falls in short, shallow jerks. The engineer on duty looks at the readings and swears under his breath. The boat is running out of air and time. Savitsky takes all this in, the half-conscious mechanic. The sweat glistening on every forehead, the tremor in Maslenikov's hands. The way even the most hardened petty officers have started licking cracked lips more often between orders. His pride makes one last push. If we go up, he says, and they humiliate this boat, and later we learn that they had already launched missiles at our homeland, will you still be so certain we chose correctly? Arkhipov does not hesitate. No, he says, I will never be certain. Not now. Not in 20 years. I will lie awake wondering if we should have acted differently. That is the burden. But if we launch, there will be no time later to wonder about anything. There will be nothing left to wonder with. He steps closer still, his voice dropping to something only the captain can truly hear. If you fire that torpedo out of wounded pride, history will not care that our air was hot and our radios silent. It will remember you as the man who ended everything because he could not endure being hunted. The words are cruel. They are also, in this context, perhaps the only ones with enough weight to counterbalance fury. Savitsky's eyes flash. His shoulders twitch as if he is about to swing a fist. Then some of the tension leaks out of him all at once, leaving behind exhaustion and something like shame. He turns away from Arkhipov and faces the room. We will come to periscope depth, he says. Prepare to ascend. Slowly. No unnecessary noise. We will surface if required. Maslenikov starts to protest, reflex more than thought. Comrade Captain, the instructions. The captain wheels on him. Our primary instruction is to safeguard the interests of the Soviet Union, he says, not to light the world on fire because some American sonar operator is playing with his equipment. We ascend. The guard at the safe exhales in a small, involuntary sound. His rifle lowers a fraction of an inch. Petya's shoulders sag. The radio man closes his eyes for a heartbeat and touches the side of his console, as if thanking it for not delivering orders that would have made this choice impossible. Orders ripple through the compartments. Ballast tanks adjust. Planes are trimmed. The bow rises a few degrees. The submarine answers with another different kind of groan as it begins to climb through the weight of water that has held it down. The air does not get cooler. The Americans do not stop their pinging. The threat outside does not vanish. If anything, it grows sharper as they approach the surface, where the margin for error shrinks. But one decision has been made in the heat and noise of the control room. The pen will not touch that third line. The chained son in Tube 1 will remain chained a little longer, while a tired man named Vasili Arkhipov bets everything he loves and everything he fears on the hope that restraint, for once, will not be mistaken for weakness. The first time Vasili Arkhipov watched a man's skin come off in his hands, he thought his mind was playing a trick on him. On submarine K-19, the light in the cramped reactor compartment was a sick yellow, filtered through steam and sweat and fear. The men who went in there came out different, as if something had reached inside them and rearranged what it meant to be alive. At first it was just red patches on cheeks and hands like sunburn, then blisters, then something worse. Mateyuk, the electrician, had been laughing when they pulled him back out after his second trip. It was a raw, hysterical sound that had nothing to do with humor. He had grabbed Arkipov's sleeve with both hands. "We fixed it, comrade officer," he said, his voice slurring at the edges. "The temperature is dropping. The reactor. She will not explode." His fingers slipped. Arkhipov grabbed his hand to steady him. The skin under his palm felt wrong, too soft, too loose. When he pulled his own hand back, a piece of Mateyuk's skin came with it, like wet paper peeling from a wall. For a second his brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. His hand. The man's hand. The torn skin in between. Then Mateyuk looked down, saw the raw red flesh underneath, and breathed in once, sharply, as if he had been punched. He did not scream. He just stared. Later, in the makeshift infirmary, all 8 of them lay in narrow bunks, bandages wrapped around their hands, their faces, their chests. Their hair was already starting to come out in clumps. One had vomited until there was nothing left and then kept retching anyway, his body trying to expel something it could not reach. The air had smelled like iodine, bile, and something metallic and sour that no one wanted to name. "You will be fine," Arkhipov had told them, because there was nothing else to say. "You saved the boat. You saved us." "We saved the motherland," one of them croaked, and grinned through cracked lips, and that grin haunted him far more than the torn skin. None of them lived more than a few weeks. On B-59, in the hot Black Sea of another crisis, he can still feel the texture of that skin in his palm. The submarine is climbing, meter by slow meter. The hull creaks as the pressure eases, a long, exhausted exhale after too long, under a weight no human can really imagine. Men cling to handholds, to consoles, to ritual. Someone quietly counts under his breath, not numbers but names. A wife, a son, a village, a street, as if saying them out loud will anchor them to a future where they still exist. Arkhipov sits on the same steel bench, his back pressed against the same bulkhead as in the first chapter of this ordeal. But inside him, everything feels slightly shifted. A decision has been made, but its weight has not lessened. It has just changed shape. He reaches into his pocket and touches the plastic sleeve. The letter is warm from his body heat. The edges of the paper inside have gone soft from folding and unfolding. He does not take it out yet. He feels it, lets the familiarity of its small rectangle remind him that his life is not just steel and orders and heat. Somewhere far away, in a city built of stone and trauma, a woman and a little girl exist in color rather than gray. Every man on this boat has some version of that. Not all carry it in their pocket. Some carry it only in memory. In the control room, Captain Savitsky stares at the depth gauge as if he can make the needle move faster by sheer hatred. The numbers crawl. The air gets no cooler. The taste of it changes in subtle ways that only men who have been breathing the same volume for days can detect. More sour, less oxygen, more of the exhaled ghosts of everyone aboard. Maslenikov stands with his hands behind his back, the picture of a political officer maintaining form in adversity. Inside, his thoughts are a mess of doctrine, fear, and calculations. If they survive this, there will be questions. Why did you not employ the special weapon? Why did you permit surfacing in the presence of an enemy task force? Why did you contradict clear instructions designed by committees in windowless buildings? He imagines sitting in a chair in a small office, across from a man in a clean uniform with no sweat stains, explaining why he sided with caution when boldness was demanded by paper. He looks at Arkhipov, at the stillness that hides something sharp, and wonders if he can blame him later without sounding like a coward. The hull shivers slightly. The sonar operator raises a hand. "New signal, Comrade Captain. Different pattern, longer pulse. Likely helicopter dipping sonar, range decreasing." On the surface, the helicopter hangs low above the water, its rotors shredding the air into a constant roar. The cylinder slung beneath it dips into the sea with almost delicate precision, like a surgeon inserting a probe. On the flight deck of the destroyer nearby, American sailors watch, some with professional focus, some with boredom, none with any concept that a single decision a few meters below could have turned them into vapor. Inside B-59, the new sonar pulse passes through the hull. It feels like someone running a wet finger around the rim of a glass the size of the boat, a long, searching vibration that brushes every rib, every skull. Petya swallows hard. His ears ring. His stomach twists. He tries to imagine the helicopter above, the men in it. To them, this is training with teeth. To him, it is someone pressing a stethoscope against his coffin to check if he is still alive. The depth gauge needle reaches the mark for periscope depth. The order comes. Raise periscope. Metal winds, water streams. The periscope head pierces the surface and rises into air that has not yet tasted diesel and fear. The sea clings to it for a second, then falls away. Savitsky wraps his hands around the grips. They are cooler than anything else he has touched in days. He lowers his face to the eyepiece, and the world above squeezes into a small, bright circle. For a moment, all he sees is light. The sky punches into his brain like a physical blow. Blue. High. Indifferent. After days of green lamps and gray bulkheads, it feels obscene. Clouds drift, innocent and white. Then he drags his gaze down to the horizon. Gray shapes sit on the water in a ring, exactly where he knew they would be. Destroyers, sleek and purposeful, Plumes of spray mark where charges have fallen. The wakes they leave carve white scars into the blue. On their decks, men move about in clean uniforms. To his eye, trained to read silhouettes, there is something almost arrogant in the way the destroyers glide. They are not hiding. They are not afraid. He swings the periscope. There, further out, a bigger shape, blunt bow and flat back. An aircraft carrier, a floating metal continent stacked with planes, cranes, towers. A nation's industrial might condensed into one hull. He feels something sour rise in his throat. The temptation is immediate and physical. One torpedo in the right place and that carrier would become a twisted reef. One special torpedo in the middle of that formation and the destroyers would go with it. Torn in half by a blast no one has ever seen in combat before. His hand tightens on the grips. Then a different image overlays the view. Not steel and wake and clean uniforms, but 8 men lying in bandages with their skin sloughing off and their hair falling out. Men who did their duty and died in slow motion to prevent a different kind of catastrophe. He pulls his eye away from the eyepiece and steps back. For a second, the circle of light remains burned into his vision, the outlines of enemy ships floating in front of him, no matter where he looks. He turns to Arkhipov. "They are there, all around us, waiting," he says. "Are their guns trained on us?" Arkhipov asks. "Not yet," Savitsky answers. "They think they are hunting an animal, not walking around a powder keg." His voice cracks on the last word. He hears it. So does everyone else. Maslenikov adjusts his glasses, seizing the moment to re-enter the argument. "If you surface fully, they will force us to stop engines. They will board. They will photograph equipment. They will interrogate the crew. They may detect the torpedo. That is not just humiliation. That is a compromise of state secrets on a level none of us are authorized to permit." Authorized. The word clangs in Archipov's head like a dropped wrench. On K-19, no one was authorized to send men into a compartment with radiation levels that pushed the needles off the dials. They did it anyway because the alternative was a reactor breach and a different kind of disaster. Authorization came afterward in the form of medals handed to widows. He reaches into his pocket and, for the first time since this patrol began, pulls out the plastic sleeve. The letter inside is stained around the edges, the ink slightly blurred where a drop of water or sweat found its way past the seal long ago. He unfolds it carefully. The paper protests at the creases. His fingers, thick from years of cold water and rope, are clumsy and gentle at once. Vasili, his wife's handwriting begins, and for a heartbeat, the control room falls away. He is not on B-59. He is in a small kitchen in Moscow, paint peeling at the corners of the walls, kettle hissing on the stove. His wife sits at the table, hair wrapped in a scarf against the draft, their daughter drawing on a scrap of paper with a stub of colored pencil. Our daughter asks every day when you will be home. She says she will not grow anymore until you come back to see it. I told her that is not how growing works, but she insists. She has drawn a picture for you. Below the words is a crudely drawn submarine. It has too many guns and too many windows. Water is represented by aggressive blue lines. Above it, a stick figure in a dress waves. The girl's face is a circle with 2 dots and a line that bends up at both ends, the way children draw smiles when they have not yet learned any other shapes. I hope the sea is kinder to you than the city is to us. The letter ends. Come back when you can. We will be waiting. Do not stay away too long, or you will miss too many small things. He had smiled when he first read that. Now, in this overheated steel tube, the words cut in a different way. He imagines that stick figure under a sky lit by nuclear fire, skin sliding from small hands the way it did from Matyuk's, hair falling out in black clumps on a kitchen floor. There would be no reactor compartment to fix this time, no pumps to restart, no way to send anyone into anything to pull the system back from the brink. Once the first city goes, the rest will follow. The machine will run itself. He folds the letter again, slower this time, places it back in his pocket as if he is putting his daughter somewhere safe. Then he looks up. On the destroyer above, Charles Donovan listens to his sonar operator call out changes in bearing and depth. The contact is moving up. Whatever is down there is coming closer to the surface. He feels a flicker of satisfaction. The pressure is working. He does not know about the letter. He does not know about K-19. He does not know his life is currently pinned in place by a memory of burned skin and a child's drawing. Below, Maslenikov is still talking. "We have been entrusted with a weapon the enemy does not know we possess," he says. "To expose this vessel is to risk that secret. The Americans could learn more in one boarding action than our intelligence has gleaned from them in years." He is not entirely wrong. That is the worst part. Arkhipov steps closer to him. "You speak of trust," he says. "Those men on K-19 trusted that their deaths meant something, that by going into that compartment, they were preventing a catastrophe, not just postponing it. If we launch that torpedo now, we are telling them they died so that we could start a different disaster a year later. Do you want that on your conscience?" The political officer's mouth opens, then closes. For a heartbeat, there is no party line prepared for that sentence. Savitsky watches this back and forth, his jaw clenched so tight it hurts. He is tired in a way he has never been tired before, not just in his muscles, but in the part of him that has to weigh pride against survival, doctrine against reality. He remembers his own first command, a small boat in a cold sea, long before there were nuclear torpedoes and dipping sonar, and politicians arguing over missiles on tropical islands. The sea had been the same then, indifferent, capricious, capable of killing quietly and without malice. He looks at Arkhipov and sees not just a deputy, not just an officer with a scar in his past, but a man holding a line no one in Moscow will ever see. "If I order the launch, will you sign?" he asks, and the room freezes even harder than it already has. Arkhipov does not look away. "No," he says, "I will not." The words are simple. They land like a hammer. "That is refusal to obey," Maslenikov snaps. "That is grounds for what?" Arkhipov cuts in. "Court-martial. Execution. Write any charge you like. You can write it on my headstone if that makes it easier, but you will not have my name on the order that starts what comes after that torpedo leaves the tube." He takes a step closer to Savitsky, voice low enough that some of the younger sailors have to lean forward to hear. "Valentin," he says, "and there is plea and steel in equal measure. You know what it is to command men. You know what it is to send some to their deaths so that others might live. There is no shame in that when it is necessary. It is the burden of our rank. But this is different. This is not choosing which of our men die. This is choosing whether everyone's children die." Savitsky's eyes shine, and not just from sweat. Something cracks inside his chest. All the training, all the doctrine, all the lectures about deterrence and duty, and the glorious role of the Soviet Navy in the balance of world power shudder under the weight of 8 dead men with their skin peeling, and one little girl with a lopsided smile drawn in blue pencil. He looks at the safe. He looks at the periscope. He looks at the men. "I will not be the one," he says very quietly, "to take that choice away from the world." He turns his head. "Prepare to surface," he orders. "Full." The words send a physical jolt through the boat. Not the shock of an explosion, but the release of a tension that had been tightening vertebrae for hours. Men move, valves open, air shifts. The hull changes its song as B-59 rises toward the boundary between hidden and seen. On the destroyer, Donovan's radar operator speaks again. "Contact surfacing, sir. Center of the pattern. Looks like our guest wants to talk." Donovan exhales slowly. "Then we will be very polite," he says. He has no idea that politeness is the only thing standing between him and a heat so bright and brief that his shadow would be burned into the deck. Inside B-59, the last meters to the surface feel longer than the whole descent had days before. Every man can feel them, in the changes in pressure in his ears, in the way the air seems to thin even further as nerves spike. The letter in Arkhipov's pocket presses against his chest. Matyuk's hand burns ghost-like in his palm. The safe stands unopened. The document lies inside, 2 signatures inked, the 3rd line blank. The submarine breaks the surface. Steel pierces air. Water spills. The world changes sound. For the first time in days, there is real sky above them, real wind moving across metal, real light that does not hum. Somewhere in that brightness, cameras are already turning toward them. So are gun barrels. So are eyes. The 3rd line on the authorization document remains empty. The first thing that hits them is not fear. It is air. When the hull finally claws its way out of the sea, the ocean hangs on for a moment, dragging at the steel as if it has grown used to owning this shape. Then water peels away in sheets. It slams back down in white crashes that shake the whole boat in a new, unfamiliar rhythm. For days, every sound has come muffled through water. Now the noise is raw and open and too big. The command to open the hatch tears down the tower like a shout in a church. The locking wheel fights back. Salt and pressure have glued metal to metal. The sailor on the ladder puts his whole weight into it. For a second, nothing happens. Then something gives with a jagged scream. The hatch jumps, then swings up. A rectangle of blinding white explodes into the conning tower. The air that pours in tastes wrong. It is cool on skin that has forgotten such a thing is possible. It smells of salt and fuel and something green and distant. After days of breathing liquid heat, of sucking in other men's exhalations and battery fumes, it feels like breathing a different planet. For 3 heartbeats, Captain Valentin Savitsky just stares at that open hatch. Part of his brain is already climbing, already scanning horizons and ship silhouettes. Another, more animal part wants to simply stand here and inhale until his lungs hurt for a different reason. Move, he orders himself, and his body obeys. Metal rungs bite into his palms as he hauls himself up. His head breaks into daylight, and the sun punches him between the eyes. The sky is a savage blue, so bright it feels like an insult. Even squinting, even with sweat and salt burning in his lashes, he can see the hard line where that impossible color hits the darker rim of the sea. He drags himself onto the tiny bridge. Hot wind grabs at his soaked uniform, tries to lift it off his skin, and fails. He puts a hand on the rail to steady himself and sees that it is trembling. It takes a second to realize the shaking belongs to his hand, not the steel. Then he sees them. Gray hulls ring the submarine in a wide circle, like teeth around a throat. Destroyers low and lean, their bows biting into the swell. On each one, tiny dark shapes line the rails. Men with binoculars, men pointing, men just staring. They look like ants on a knife. Closer than the rest, one destroyer aims its bow straight at B-59, rolling slightly in the waves like a predator flexing its shoulders. On its mast, a rectangle of red and white and blue snaps in the wind, bright and sharp and utterly out of place over all that gray. Savitsky has seen this in intelligence photos, in chalk drawings on classroom blackboards. He knows their tonnage, their gun calibers, their radar ranges. None of that looks like this. None of that felt like being on a black speck of metal surrounded by industrial continents. Boots clang on the ladder behind him. Political officer Ivan Maslenikov emerges, blinking furiously, his face suddenly papery under the hard light. He squints at the sky like it is an accusation. Deputy Flotilla Commander Vasili Arkhipov comes last. He steps onto the bridge and the wind hits him like a hand. It smells of open water and distant land and oil and something that is not death. For a second, his knees almost go. He had pictured this moment in the abstract when he argued against the torpedo. You will have to stand up there, he had told himself, and face their eyes, and live with what you chose. He had not pictured how bright it would be, how loud the wind is when you have forgotten it exists, how small men look when they are scattered across destroyer decks, too far away for their faces to exist. The destroyers do not open fire, they do not charge, they glide into new positions, tightening the circle by a few careful degrees. Their guns are not raised to maximum elevation, but they are not sleeping either. Barrels sit at the subtle angle of readiness, following on slow mounts as the black submarine twists in the swell. On the nearest destroyer's bridge wing, an American officer named Charles Donovan lifts binoculars. Through his lenses, the Soviet boat is no longer an abstract contact, but a scarred cylinder of steel dripping with water. The men on its bridge are not red pins on a chart. They are faces, pale under the tan, eyes sunk in deep shadows, uniforms so soaked with sweat they look painted on. He had expected anger, maybe a defiant fist in the air, a gesture, a sign. What he reads instead is something worse. Bone-deep exhaustion, a strange, wary calculation, and something that looks unsettlingly like the same quiet outrage he feels when someone far above his rank sends him into danger with too little information. He signals anyway. Orders are orders. Bright signal flags jump up his mast and snap open. On B-59, a sailor with battered lenses squints at the colored shapes dancing across the nearest destroyer. "Flags, comrade captain," he says, his voice rough from air that is still too thin. They are speaking. Savitsky snatches the binoculars. The colors blur, then settle into hard edges and patterns. His training drags up from somewhere under the heat and fear. "Stop your engines. Prepare to be boarded." The words might as well be carved into his teeth. Every humiliation he had dreaded when he first heard the charges above them is here, neat and folded in colored cloth. Foreign boots on his deck. Foreign hands on Soviet rails. Questions. Cameras. Later in Moscow, reports with phrases like allowed unauthorized access to classified compartments. Maslenikov sees the flicker in his eyes and steps closer. "We cannot agree to boarding," he says, the political cadence outpacing his heartbeat. The special weapon. "They will not see it," Savitsky snaps before he can stop himself. But he knows. The political officer knows. Arkhipov knows. Boards creak when too much weight is put on them. This boat's secrecy has been designed like that. One bad step can send a stranger crashing through to something he was never meant to know exists. Down below, in the engine room, Chief Engineer Shubin leans against a hot bulkhead and stares up at the pipework like it has personally insulted him. His shirt is white with dried salt, his hair plastered to his skull. He hears the words from above, relayed down in flat tones. "Stop engines." His jaw works. He had been running silent, frantic maths in his head for hours now. Battery reserves, air quality, heat buildup. Each number marched toward a cliff. Stopping means humiliation. Not stopping means betting on machinery already pushed past where reason says it should hold. He pulls the throttle levers back. The familiar vibration that has been under his boots for days fades into a slower, heavier thrum. The submarine rocks differently now, moving with the sea instead of through it. For the first time on this patrol, it feels more like an object being acted upon than a thing with will. On the bridge, the quiet that follows that order feels worse than any explosion. Arkhipov feels the shift like a change in blood pressure. He watches the wake behind them shorten, then vanish. Something in his chest clenches. Motion had been an illusion of control. Stopping strips that away. The American destroyer hoists new flags. Prepare to be boarded. No one needs glasses for that. Even without code, the small boat being lowered on davits makes the message clear. Men in helmets and life vests drop down nets, vanish behind a swell, then appear again in the bobbing hull below. For a heartbeat, Archipov's mind splits the scene into two layers. On one layer, this is a routine game of navies. We shadow you. You surface. We inspect. Everyone goes home and writes reports full of words like firmness and professionalism. On another layer, barely a meter below his boots, in a locked steel safe, lies a piece of paper with a blank third line and a weapon in the bow that would have turned that boarding boat into boiling vapor before the men inside it understood they had ever lived. Maslenikov breathes out a thin, angry laugh. They will walk our corridors. They will write down what they see. This will be a propaganda victory that will echo for years. There is something almost desperate in how he repeats phrases from trainings given by men who have never seen reactor burns. "You are worried about flattery in their newspapers," Arkhipov says, not raising his voice. "I am worried about what happens to my daughter if we light the sky on fire." The words catch even him off guard. He had not meant to say her out loud. On K-19, he had lied to the wounded. "You will be fine. Your sacrifice will be remembered." It had felt like the least he could do. Now the least he can do is not lie to himself. Savitsky's head snaps a little at that line. He has never asked about Archipov's family. It was not his habit to ask about such things in officers. They were all supposed to be married to the fleet first. But suddenly, the private life becomes unbearably relevant. On the American destroyer, Donovan watches the boarding boat pound toward the black hull, water fans up at its bow in two hard wings. The men inside it look small and hard and very fragile. "No weapons free," he says again to his bridge crew. "No one touches a trigger unless they fire first. We are not starting World War III over a misstep on a ladder." He says it because it is common sense, because it is what his briefings said, because the idea that anything he does here could actually ignite that war feels theatrical, not real. The missiles and the red phones and the end of everything live in other rooms, with other men. He does not know that for the last day, the end of everything has lived in a hot control room 6 meters under his keel. The boarding boat bangs against B-59's hull. Ropes fly. Hands on both sides grab, tie, make fast. For a second, the two nations are literally bound together by wet hemp and friction. The first American climbs the ladder. Boots thump on rungs. A helmet appears, then a face. He is younger than some of B-59's petty officers. There is salt in his eyebrows and a nervous tightness at the corners of his mouth that discipline cannot quite erase. His boots hit Soviet steel. The sound echoes down the tower like a hammer on hollow metal. Behind him, an older officer follows. Lines on his face, hard shoulders. He introduces himself loudly, rank and name and ship, the syllables carried by the wind and mangled slightly by accent. It is ritual as much as information. We are professionals. We are here as instruments, not men. For a moment, nobody moves. The Soviet sailors on the bridge stare at the American uniforms. The Americans stare back at faces that smell of diesel and heat and something sourer. For both groups, the shock is not in the existence of the other. It is in the ordinariness. There is no monster here, no Hollywood villain, just tired men in different cloth, blinking in the same hard light. Arkhipov steps forward. "Welcome aboard submarine B-59, he says. The English is rough but clear. His voice holds respect without any trace of friendliness. We will cooperate with inspection for safety, within reason. It is the last two words that make the older American officer's eyes narrow. He hears something in the tone he cannot quite place. Defiance seems too simple a word. It is more complicated, as if this man has just walked away from an argument with someone far worse than him. When they go below, Arkhipov goes with them. The air slaps the boarding party as they drop through the hatch. The heat is like a physical wall. The smell is dense and layered. Diesel, metal, sweat. The iron tang of too many breaths in too small a volume. One of the younger Americans recoils instinctively before mastering himself. His officer does not miss it. "You have been down a long time," he says. Half statement, half question. "Long enough," Arkhipov answers. They move through the boat. Foreign boots on steel plates. Foreign hands brushing bulkheads by reflex. The Americans note gauges, count torpedo tubes, glance at bunks crammed into impossible spaces. A camera clicks, whirs, clicks again. Each frame freezes something that should never have been seen by their side. The forward compartments loom ahead. The air seems to get heavier the closer they come. "This way," Arkhipov says very politely, and angles his body to block the more direct route. That section is not safe. Heat damage. It is a lie wrapped around a thinner truth. The bow did take a beating earlier in the patrol when an American plane's practice bomb fell too close. There is cosmetic damage. There is also a warhead in Tube 1 that changes the entire meaning of the phrase unsafe. The American officer hesitates just long enough to show that he is curious and just little enough to show that he is not going to fight every small point on a Soviet boat far from help. He lets Arkhipov guide them along a slightly different path. In the torpedo room, Petya sits on a crate watching them come. He had thought, in half-delirious moments between depth charges, about what an American would look like up close. Taller, bigger, eyes a different shade. He had not thought they would look so similar. A bit cleaner, less tired, but the way one of them glances at the sweating pipes is exactly how he looks at them too. They pass the safe without knowing it. Metal behind metal, ink behind steel, a sheet of paper that might as well be a live charge. Questions are asked. How long submerged? Any mechanical problems? Any injuries? Some answers are honest. Some are half-truths. None mention the argument over the third line. At one point, the American officer pulls at his collar. "It is hot as hell down here," he mutters, almost to himself. Arkhipov looks at him. "You have been down here 15 minutes, he says. "We have been down here 3 days. For a second, the other man's eyes meet his. Something naked flickers there. It is not sympathy. It is the sudden, unpleasant realization that whatever courage he thinks he is displaying does not quite match what these men have already had to endure. When the last question is asked and the last photograph taken, when the American officer has convinced himself he has seen enough without realizing he has not seen the one thing that matters, they climb back to the bridge. The small boat peels away, engine snarling. Ropes slap wetly against hulls as they fall loose. The destroyer takes her boarding party back into the neat geometry of her wake. On B-59, the wind feels slightly different with foreigners gone. It is an illusion, but a strong one. The deck under their boots feels more theirs again. The circle of destroyers widens by a small, imperceptible amount. The guns stay trained, but the posture changes. The Americans have made their point. They have flexed. Now they will watch. We set course away, Savitsky says, his voice rough but steady. Slow. Obvious. Let them see we are leaving. Maslenikov opens his mouth, then closes it. There are only so many ways he can say the same objections before they start sounding like fear. Engines ahead slow. Comes the order down below. Shubin throws the levers forward. The familiar vibration returns underfoot, weaker than before. But there. The boat moves. Not diving now, just cutting a line through bright water under the guns of ships that could tear it open in seconds. Arkhipov watches the destroyer slide past as B-59 turns. He feels no triumph, only the deep, shaky exhale of a man who has been holding his breath at some level for far too long. Maslenikov moves closer, his voice almost lost in the wind. When we get home, he says, they will ask why we did not use what we were given. Arkhipov does not take his eyes off the horizon. Then we will tell them the truth, he says, that we carried a weapon designed to prevent war, not to start one out of wounded pride in a hot room. If they want to punish someone for that, they can start with me. You think that will protect the rest of us? Maslenikov asks. No, Arkhipov says, but it is something I can still offer. Below deck, in the quiet, after the visitors have left, someone finally dares to make a bad joke. It is thin. It is not very funny. Men laugh anyway, too loudly, letting the brittle sound bounce off steel and push some of the fear back into its corners. In his pocket, folded and refolded, the letter from Moscow presses against Arkipov's chest with every breath. He imagines his daughter drawing something new now. Maybe not a submarine, maybe a house, maybe a tree. Maybe nothing at all. Maybe she is just waiting. He lays a hand briefly on the bulkhead as he heads back inside, a small, unconscious gesture of thanks to steel that held and systems that did not fail in the one catastrophic way they could have. Somewhere in a safe deep in the boat, 3 lines still wait under typed words of authorization. 2 of them carry names scrawled in hurried ink in cooler days. The third remains a strip of white. Years later, men in suits and historians in quiet rooms will trace arrows on maps and say that the world came close to war here and here and here. They will point to missiles in Cuba and photographs of silos and transcripts of phone calls between capitals. Some of them will learn about a submarine called B-59. Fewer will understand that in the end everything balanced on less than a centimeter of blank paper. Above, the sky stays brutally, indifferently blue. The destroyers fall into escort positions, shadows rather than hunters now. B-59 moves forward, small and stubborn, carrying on board men who will never quite sleep the same again, a letter that almost lost its future, and a third line that never learned the weight of ink.